everyone, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name's Nina, and here at this channel we talk all about mental health, personal development, and psychology. And today we're going to be talking about a really interesting phenomenon called the Dunning Kruger Effect. We'll be talking about what it is, how it can affect our lives, and finally how we can learn to overcome it. So let's start by defining it. The Dunning Kruger effect is the cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. This phenomenon can also include the opposite effect, whereby people with high performance skills underestimate their ability. So this phenomenon really explains two things. It explains why people often overestimate how intelligent or capable they are, as well as why so many people underestimate their capability or their proficiency when they are highly skilled. Now, usually when we hear this term used in pop culture, it's referring to people who fail to recognize their own incompetence. However, it can describe the exact opposite, so that's something to keep in mind. I also want to point out that while this is a very real phenomenon, it's not something that we want to run wild with. We don't want to start to constantly question ourselves or worry about our own ability or start to believe that we must be incompetent. It is certainly possible that this cognitive bias is not affecting us in any type of significant way. But it is something that affects many people, which is why it is very helpful to have an understanding of this and an awareness of it so we can learn to spot it. I really love this quote by Charles Darwin because I think it perfectly sums up this cognitive bias. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. The Dunning-Kruger effect, however, is just one of many cognitive biases that can influence our judgment and our behavior, and that can affect us both professionally and personally. And just like any other bias, it is much easier to notice this phenomenon in other people than to recognize it in ourselves. That's why having this awareness is so important, because when we can see that we have this tendency, we can learn how to effectively overcome it. So let me give you some quick examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and probably you are going to immediately notice that you've seen these situations play out yourself. So one could be if we went to a karaoke bar, let's say, and we notice that there is person after person that gets up on the stage with confidence that has zero vocal ability. They are belting their hearts out, they have no problem getting on stage, but again, they just can't sing. Whereas you might be with your friend who is an excellent vocalist, but refuses to get on stage because they are questioning their own ability. Another example might be a coworker who is clearly not very knowledgeable about politics, but yet they are always the most vocal and opinionated person about the topic in the entire office. Maybe they catch the headlines and they just feel like they know it all and they are constantly talking about it. This phenomenon is something that I would see over and over and over again when I used to be a dance studio owner and dance instructor for adults, where people would take one or two lessons and they would be really confident, even though they were just beginners, and they would say something like, well, when is the audition for the performance company? Or, are there any performance opportunities? Are there any gigs that I could do? Whereas the ladies that were in the performance company or even in the higher level classes that had studied dance for quite some time were much more humble a lot of times, a lot more reserved, and questioned their ability much more than the people that were just beginning. And that's because they had that understanding that dance is complex, that there is always more to learn. And so we never feel that we are a master because we always know that we can learn more, and that can be intimidating, and it can also hold us back from pursuing opportunities. So in many cases, even though these dancers were so talented, they would not go on auditions that they probably would have been very successful at, or they wouldn't take gigs, or they wouldn't do a solo because they were questioning their ability when really it was there. So you can see that this Dunning-Kruger effect can really affect us in either direction. And I'm sure you can think of 1,000 examples from your own life where you have been shocked at someone's confidence level at something that they are not very good at, and on the opposite end, really stunned by the fact that someone can have an amazing ability at something yet fail to recognize that as well. So in short, people who are affected by this bias will be likely to overestimate their own skill level, be unable to recognize the skill or expertise of others, and fail to recognize their own errors or lack of skill. Or of course, if the bias is affecting them in the opposite way, they will likely fail to recognize their own skills and expertise, overestimate the skills of others, and mentally exaggerate their mistakes and errors. In situations where we are overestimating our abilities, one of the biggest contributing factors is that when we have a little bit of knowledge about something, it can lead us to believe that we are an expert, that we know everything because we don't yet know all that we don't know, if that makes sense. And I can think of a clear example of this in my own life. When I was about 15 or 16 years old, I started playing guitar, and about 6 months later, a friend asked me how I was doing with the instrument, and I remember distinctly saying that I thought I was doing great, that I felt like I had pretty much mastered it, that there was really nothing that I couldn't do, which is so laughable because decades later, I now realize that there is so much to learn, and I would never call myself a master. In fact, I would say I was a beginner more than I would say I was a master. So I think that is a great example of the Dunning Kruger effect in my own life, and it really gives credibility to the statement, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Because when we have this false sense of confidence, when we have this false sense of mastery, it can put us in some really difficult positions where we are unaware that we are incompetent. It's also important to note that this really has much less to do with intelligence than it has to do with self-awareness. So in a lot of cases, highly intelligent people fall prey to this cognitive bias because they have the false belief that being good at one thing really translates to other things that have nothing to do with that one thing. But they may be confident in other areas, which leads them to have false confidence in things that they really aren't very knowledgeable in. So what really causes this effect? Why do we overestimate or underestimate our abilities to such a strong degree? I think the biggest thing is that when we start to learn something and we gain a little bit of confidence and a little bit of knowledge about it, and then we stop learning at that point, we have that false sense of mastery. We think we understand it because we think we've learned all there is to be learned. Whereas the more we learn and the more we grow, we have an understanding that these skills are complex and that there is a lot involved. And unfortunately, this is where so many people give up. This is where they kind of throw in the towel because they think about where they are now and think about how far they need to go to get where they think that they want to be, that they just stop trying. And unfortunately, we have to get through this part to be able to really master anything. So I think we have a pretty good understanding of what the Dunning Kruger effect really is and how it can affect us. So now let's talk about how we can start to overcome this bias. The first thing that we can do is to continue to learn and or practice whatever it is we are working on. So once we feel like we have an understanding of something or we have some knowledge, now we need to go deeper and deeper and deeper. We need to keep learning because when we do this, we have a greater understanding of how much more there is to learn, which is going to help us to understand where we are in the process of achieving this goal. The second thing that we can do is to invite constructive criticism. And I know that's something that many of us want to avoid because we are always afraid to get negative feedback. And also, we don't want to solely base our assessments or our opinions of ourselves on what other people think. However, feedback can be very, very helpful. It can really help us mold a more accurate view of where we are at in certain skills. So ask some people how they think that you are doing and just hear what they have to say. You don't have to necessarily agree, but it's always great to have that extra feedback. And the third thing that we can do is probably the most difficult, but definitely the most helpful, and that is to learn how to evaluate ourselves objectively. We need to set our ego aside and simply use critical thought. We need to kind of think of ourselves as a third person and just kind of look at the big picture to see where we really are, again, objectively, without taking it personally, and realize that in many of these cases, we're going to realize that we are better at something than we think we are. It's not always going to be a negative assessment, but it's better when we can be real with ourselves. When we can be real with ourselves and we can be objective, we can further our skills so much more easily because we have that awareness. We can realize what it is we need to work on and how we can get there. And in addition to all of these things, we want to remember to keep challenging our own beliefs and our own ideas so that we can continue to grow in whatever skills we are working on and just as a person overall. And the more we start to put these skills into practice, the more we're going to find that we are able to accurately assess ourselves, and we're not going to be overestimating our abilities or underestimating our abilities, which is really helpful in that process of achieving the goals overall. But again, we want to keep in mind that life is not a competition, and we don't want to constantly be judging ourselves and rating ourselves in every single facet of our life. But when there are situations where we really do need to know where we are at in a certain aspect of our life or in a certain goal, this is the way we can make that assessment be a lot more accurate. So I am curious to hear if you think the Dunning Kruger effect is something that is significantly impacting your life or something that you already had an awareness of. Definitely let me know in the comments. I love to hear examples of this effect, especially looking back into our past. A lot of times it can be almost funny to see the things that we felt that we were so good at. So definitely do leave a comment, and I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope you found today's video to be insightful and helpful. Definitely become a subscriber if you aren't one already, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have an amazing day, guys. Take care.